Here's your creative, 800-word narrative titled Cillian Murphy officially returning for 28 years later. The rumor mill has finally spun reality into flesh and bone. Cillian Murphy, the very soul of the original 28 Days Later, is officially coming back to the 28 Years Later franchise. But this is no ordinary return. It's the prologue to a much grander trilogy that reshapes the mythology of the Rage virus saga. The official word. Across months of speculation, director Danny Boyle and Sony executive Tom Rothman remained tantalizingly vague. Murphy would return in a surprising way. And in a way that grows. Sony even leaned on his name to back experimental footage shot entirely on iPhones. Ultimately, Boyle confirmed, Jim returns in the second film of the trilogy, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, debuting January 16, 2026. Meanwhile, the first film, 28 Years Later, released June 20, 2025, centers entirely on new characters: Aaron Taylor-Johnson's Jamie, Jodie Comer's Isla, their son Spike, leaving Cillian Murphy's Jim off-screen entirely, though credited as executive producer. He's not in Part 1, but the ending teases his arrival in Part 2, and Boyle hopes Murphy's presence will help greenlight the trilogy's third chapter, which he plans to direct himself. A mythic return. How Jim reappears. If you thought the first film's post-credits Easter egg of a lone figure in a ruined cottage was just fanbait, well, you weren't wrong. Murmurs from set photos and location sightings suggest Murphy has aged, battered, living in isolation, possibly injured, with long hair, holding vigil in that same Lake District cabin. Here's the creative reimagining. Greater than 2 decades have passed. Jim, once the lucid bike courier who survived the Rage virus, has inhabited solitude for 28 years. His body is scarred, his bones frail, his mind drifting between delirium and clarity. He's become legend, stories of the man who tamed the infected whispered among cults and survivors. Greater than the Bone Temple is named for itself, a shadowed shrine built by survivors, walls made of bones commemorating both victims and those lost to rage. And in the flickering torchlight, a silhouette emerges. Jim, older, haunted, perhaps still infected, now a mythic anchor, the last bridge to link the original film with the franchise's future. Why this return matters? 1. Franchise legacy revived. The 2002 28 Days Later set new standards: fast zombies, bleak atmosphere, digital filmmaking. Bringing back Jim after more than 2 decades, the film's title isn't just for show honors that origin while expanding its lore. Murphy is both bridge and benchmark, tying the new narrative to the classic. 2. Strategic leverage for the trilogy. Murphy's involvement isn't purely creative, it's strategic. His name was central in winning over Sony for risky narrative and technical choices, including shooting with iPhones. His cameo in Part 2 is designed to secure funding for Part 3. 3. A new tone, a new scope. Boyle and Garland explain the trilogy as more mythic, built around multiple interlocking lives: Spike, Jamie, Kelson, and eventually Jim. The growth is intentional. A world-weary survivor becomes less a hero and more a cautionary myth. What ends when the virus stagnates? What survives in memory? What's ahead in the Bone Temple? Expect Jim to appear near the end of the second installment, likely in an atmospheric closing act that sets up the open door to a Jim-centered final film. Boyle hinted, she gets a bit of Cillian at the end, referring to Nia DaCosta's direction of Part 2. Should Bone Temple succeed at box office or streaming, Part 3 will proceed, potentially titled 28 Years Later Part 3 or something more poetic, fully centering on Murphy's Jim, presumably living in a dystopian post-virus Britain. Boyle and Garland have planned it. Only funding stands in the way. Creative speculation. Jim's story in 3 acts. Act I 2002. Fully human Jim wakes from coma, survives the apocalypse, waves a sign at a fighter jet. Act 2 2025. Jim absent. We meet Spike and others. Jim becomes legend, a myth,